To keep this video accessible, captions and voiceovers will be available where possible. Disclaimer. As a student of the University of California, Berkeley community, I acknowledge that I am a visitor to the Mwikma Ohlone indigenous lands that this institution is built upon. I extend my respect and gratitude to the many indigenous people who call these lands home. In addition, while I acknowledge that the lived experiences of the communities depicted in this video are ones I do not share, I strive to better understand and move towards a social change. Environmental Racism and Justice in the San Francisco Bay Area by Liam Lamb. There are many types of racism: institutional, structural, and whether or not we intend to be racist or have racist thoughts, we are implicitly. To acknowledge that and challenge our biases against that, however, is truth behind moving towards understanding other communities. Communities in the United States, California, San Francisco Bay Area have been subjected to a more unheard of type of racism: environmental racism. Environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color, according to Green Action. Let's take a look at one of the cities in the San Francisco Greater Bay Area, Richmond. Richmond is on the other side of the bay, north of San Francisco, which according to the 1990 census data and analysis on environmental racism, more than 50% of the community is African American, and more than 60% do not hold an education higher than a high school diploma, 40% of which do not have a high school diploma or equivalent. As a side note, while the census uses African American as the identification of people in the community, it is also important to realize Black is also what many prefer to be identified as. We must shift our perspectives and acknowledge that Black encompasses its own culture and identity. One of the oil industry's leading figures, Chevron, operates a multitude of refineries and industrial plants in Richmond. Since the community there is predominantly Black and educated with a high school diploma and less, pushback towards building facilities in Richmond were minimal, since people there have less say and knowledge of how they can voice for their own community. In 1993, Chevron made plans to increase the number of hazardous chemicals in the Richmond area, claiming to comply with the Clean Air Act to burn cleaner gas to improve the San Francisco Bay Area's air quality. This came at the downfall of imposing the risks onto the local predominantly Black Richmond community. In addition, between 1989 and 1995, there have been over 300 incidents at the plants, from fires, spills, explosions, and more, all putting the local community at risk. While these plants could have been placed anywhere else, it is clear that they are disproportionately placed in Richmond, impacting the Black community. With these refineries, households with the privilege to move away can do so, while those who cannot have to stay. Real estate prices drop in the communities near the refineries, perpetuating the cycle of minority families moving in due to the cheaper costs, especially in the Bay Area, but at the price of compromised air quality and environmental racism. Chevron also hires many in the local community, exposing them to higher risks at the refineries and industrial plants for only minimum wage, which is not enough to meet the rising cost of living in the Bay Area. The following is an interview performed by Democracy Now! From a demonstrator named Doria Robinson from Urban Tip in Richmond. The protest occurred shortly after the 2012 Richmond Chevron refinery explosion.
Last year on August 6th, we were coming out of the last week of our summer apprentice program, working with over 50 youth to grow food here in Richmond, and the skies went dark from the fire. You can see the flame from my front porch over 10 blocks away. We had to tear out all of the food we were growing with those youth and everyone over the last 6 months and throw it away because we didn't know if it was contaminated or not. It was absolutely devastating. But it made us actually open our eyes even further. I mean, we knew, but we didn't know, right? To the need that we have to stand up as Richmond residents on the front line to Chevron.
Now let's shift into another Bay Area city, Oakland, more specifically West Oakland. West Oakland was built up as the western terminus of the first transcontinental railroad and was pinnacle during World War II due to the Oakland Army base built. Many Black folks migrated to Oakland, only to be redlined into West Oakland in order to work at the Army base, which offered good compensations at the time. By the 1950s, West Oakland was where 80% of Oakland's Black population lived. Following into the 21st century, the West Oakland community became the connection to many interstate freeways leading to the Bay Bridge and San Francisco. In addition, new freight technologies were introduced and utilized heavily towards the Port of Oakland. Oakland International Airport, built in conjunction with the Port of Oakland and the Bay Area Rapid Transit, BART, also upheaved the community. West Oakland went through much construction in the second half of the 1900s, which uprooted and displaced much of the Black community. The Oakland Army Base returned to the city of Oakland from the federal government, which provided more land for development. However, the conflict from war remains as the area is contaminated with chemicals such as arsenic, sulfur, and many heavy metals, and the city has yet to perform any cleanups. Currently, traffic from imports and exporting trucks, trains, and ships purge West Oakland, reducing its air quality. West Oakland residents suffer from elevated cancer risks in California and have higher asthma rates and respiratory/cardiorespiratory illness than the rest of Oakland and the Bay Area. Residents of West Oakland experience life expectations of 24 years less than those in the Oakland Hills, compounded by the fact that 64% of Oakland's children do not have stable access to medical care. The Port of Oakland had a plan in the year 2000 for community input before it took that for port profits. As such, the West Oakland Black community, who were redlined there through other means of segregated racism, now experience environmental racism from the emergence of advances in society. Emissions from the freeways connecting to the Bay Bridge, ship imports and exports, and trains exponentially impact the Black community more in West Oakland than in other parts of the Bay Area. Disproportionate health impacts have also been shown as well, exacerbating with other factors such as lack of power to change the community, access to health care, and options to relocate. Margaret Gordon speaks about her experiences about growing up in West Oakland.
Being in West Oakland for 18 years, I've had one neighbor a year die of some form of cancer. Through some research, I found out that 1 out of 5 children between the ages of 0 and 5 end up in some emergency hospital for asthma treatment. We started getting into what was the root causes, why people were sick, why we had these numbers within this community. Why was the air quality in West Oakland so bad? West Oakland is in between 3 freeways, and then we had a port that used diesel.
Richmond and West Oakland both have their similarities, despite being cities away. Environmental racism has impacted the Black and minority communities that live in them. Higher and more powerful powers have subjugated the communities to disparate impacts: air quality, safe living environments, health, economical, and limits to power. The impact of environmental racism compounds as residents of these communities do not have access to the resources to break away from these communities, nor challenge for change against the powers that subjugate the disenfranchisement. However, groups have moved towards restoring the Richmond and West Oakland communities under the banner of environmental justice. Environmental justice is the intergenerational, multiracial, and international movement that promotes environmental, economic, and social justice by recognizing the direct link between economic, environmental, and health issues, and demanding a safe, clean community and workplace environment according to Green Action. In Richmond, residents from the entire Bay have come to provide demonstrations to oppose Chevron and their pollutions. The following is an interview performed by Democracy Now! from a demonstrator named Andreas Soto, Better Environment in Richmond.
Know that we're the little guys and that they're the big and powerful multinational corporation, in fact an international criminal cartel. But given all that, what we know is we have people power. They have the money power, we have the people power, and that's what we're demonstrating today. And as long as we can continue to organize, continue to bring people out, we know that Chevron ultimately is going to have to deal with us because we can't allow them to control our lives here in Richmond. We're going to run our local politics, and we're going to drive Chevron's people out of government and return the power to the people here in Richmond.
In addition, the Community for a Better Environment group in Richmond also advocates for transitions away from fossil fuels, for a better economy and local community. In Oakland, the local community there as well is acting to alleviate emissions and challenge the Port of Oakland authorities. In particular, Margaret Gordon speaks about her pathways to address the pollution.
We have been able to engage in the planning of diesel emission reduction, changing how trucks travel through the neighborhood. I'm the first resident of West Oakland that's ever been a commissioner for the Port of Oakland. Being a person of color and being a woman, it's very hard to have real influence. So I'm really trying to educate young people to understand the science and the political education about how these things operate.
Other changes included our guidelines for the port, including reduced ship speeds when docking to reduce emissions, turning off engines during idle periods for trucks, and much more to reduce the emissions impact. We ourselves play a part in the solution against environmental racism. Calling attention to these disparities is the first step in advocating for these communities, letting the communities drive their own actions, such as through demonstrations, puts them at the spotlight for advocacy of change. Contacting people in power and challenging them to make change is also a method of assisting the community, giving emphasis and expediting concerns that the community voices. Keeping thoughts about how we grew up and checking our own privilege and using it to uplift others in unfair circumstances is what it'll take to dismantle the roots of oppression, from environmental racism to all types of inequalities.